Hey, everybody, this is Nevin Gusak, the host of the Patriotic Populist. And with me once again is our trusty, deeply knowledgeable Renaissance man of a guest, Jeff Nyquist. Yeah, don't be shy, Jeff. You are very, very bright. You're a very bright, well-read gentleman and scholar. Jared Nyquist has been a geopolitical analyst, author, and writer since at least the late 1990s. He has written articles and research papers for publications such as Newsmax, WorldNet Daily, Financial Sense, and Sierra Times. I believe the Conservative Review. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, even the New American a long time ago here and there.
True, I did write an article in the New American. I did.
Yes, yes. So he has written for a variety of publications. He has authored at least three books, including The Fool and His Enemy and The Origins of the Fourth World War, to list two of the three. He also has his own blog, the Jared Nyquist blog, which is available, of course, through the World Wide Web. I encourage everybody to read it. Excellent, hard-hitting articles on national security. Often with tinges of sociology and history and psychology there. Many of the positions that Jeff has, we agree with, particularly on national security issues and the threat of Russia and China. And we agree that domestic communism is a threat. On that much, we do agree with each other very strongly at this show. And today we're going to be talking about Red Dawn, whether it was a reality or not. Now, I did over an hour-long show I would say about at least a month or two ago, and it received quite a few hits, which I'm very happy about because people need to understand the machinations of the old Soviet Union as well as now China and Russia against the continental United States. And my interest in communism and the Soviet threat was during the Cold War, where I was a young boy. I was about 10 years old, and my stepdad, who was the one responsible for getting me into history and politics, he took us to see Red Dawn in Levittown, Long Island, at the movie theaters when it came out. Are we still there, Jeff? Oh, okay, there we go. Okay.
I tried to call in on my phone. Sorry about that.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Okay, very good. So we saw the movie, and of course, I thought it was a cool action movie. And look, I was a patriotic kid. I didn't know any better. And I'm like, I love the Wolverines and all the rest of it. But I asked my stepdad, I'm like, my goodness, the Soviets, they had such advanced looking equipment and everything else, and they're so brutal and whatnot. Do they have such intentions against the United States? And he said, without batting an eye, yes. And he served in the military as an MP in Fort Bragg and whatnot. And he followed military issues for a long time. And that was particularly frightening. And years and years and years later, I started to do painstaking research, and I found that indeed the Soviets, and now, of course, our supposed friends, the Russians, and our trade partners, China, continue to plot war against the United States. Does it mean they're going to do that tomorrow? No, but that is something we need to take seriously. They are seriously making painstaking, detailed, intense preparations for decades upon decades upon decades. In fact, it's no exaggeration to say that their economies and their political systems, even their social systems, are geared for war against the United States, the main enemy. And I wanted to open up with Jeff because Jeff has been friends with and have interviewed defectors from the Red Army and its affiliate branches of the Russian and Soviet armed forces, the KGB, and then later FSB and SVR, defectors from China, defectors from Venezuela, and God knows where else. So he's bringing an intense research background here of knowing the personalities who knew these psychopathic leaders in power. And he also has done tremendous research looking through the Soviet military literature. Now, for those of you who want to read actual Soviet military texts by like Red Army Marshal Sokolovsky, V.D. Sokolovsky, and Colonel Was it VP Skirdo and others? You can get that not only through Amazon, but go to your local library and ask for an interlibrary loan. That's how I did it. Or go to a good university library. You'll find it translated into English. And the literature,
Books right here, right in this bookshelf here.
there you go. And I will say with that literature, it's, how should I say it? It's not what you would necessarily expect. It's not just all Marxist Leninist boilerplate. It's replete with a lot of practical history.
Well, they
And
Marxism, Leninism as a way of clarifying their military thought. And it's kind of surprising. At first, you think you're reading propaganda, but it's much more than that. There really is something in there.
but they put a lot of history and real world battle
Yeah.
experience, if I recall correctly. And that's what makes it a little surprising in there. And in its own perverse way, it makes sense.
Yes.
So, what is your opinion on the Red Dawn scenario? Do you think this is fact or fantasy?
Oh no, it's fact. In fact, Colonel Lunev, I spoke about it to him many times. If you read the Soviet literature, Sokolovsky, Sidorenko, Skirdo, and others, Marshal Malinovsky, if you read what they said, you will understand, you will see it in their writing, because they're these are open publication sources, the Soviet officers' library, they're orienting Soviet officers. And so they use a kind of guarded language. They don't refer to the United States as an enemy. They just talk about the enemy. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But everybody reading it knows they're talking about the United States. And when you get to Skirdo in particular, you see these references to partisan warfare and how many can be killed. And then it's mentioned like on a large continent with a large population. So you know they're talking about the United States.
Of
You
course.
really at that point. And of course, I had a chance to ask Colonel Lunev. Skirdo was one of his teachers as a young military professional back in the 70s. And of course, in the late 60s. And I asked him, I said, is this really seriously meant? I get the implication they are going to, in an all arms nuclear war, they're going to invade North America. And he said, yes. And he said something like, right away, right as the bombs are falling and the fallout is clearing, their idea was they were going to bring 10 paratroop and Marine divisions over here in the United States right away. They were to secure things like port facilities, builds, strategic openings to the countries for a main invasion. And they would have to try to hold those positions until the main invasion, which would mean they would be using nuclear weapons to clear out our fleets from the seas to make their transports could arrive. And I had the unique experience when I was in graduate school. I got curious about this, and I read. Now I can't remember the two books. It's been 40 years. They were in my. I was going to mention them in Origins of the Fourth World War, and I don't know. I ended up with so many notes I couldn't keep track of it all. But two books which I took careful notes on. The first one, which was written in 1983. The guy said, look, the Soviets have an all-arms nuclear war concept in which it looks like they're going to bomb and invade North America is part of their strategy. Because he really surveyed the literature, he looked at their force structures, and he said, there's only one problem with that theory. They don't have a big enough merchant marine. That out. This was probably the best book on them that I had found. And I thought, well, that's interesting. That was an 83 book. Then there was a 1985 book. And this guy was a bit clueless. And he said, well, the Soviets, they're planning to take over Western Europe and they're going to do this and that. And he said, but it's a big mystery. In the last 2 years, they built this enormous merchant marine. Like, okay, very interesting. But originally, my understanding is their plan was, and Lunev sort of described, when they didn't have the big enough merchant marine, they were going to grab the ship from Europe, from overrunning Europe. And he described the strategy as follows in World War III. There were three strategic echelons, that is, three giant lines of troops that attack.
Mm-hmm.
First strategic echelon, he said, would drive over NATO's nuclear minefields and detonate them and destroy itself. So they would sacrifice the first entire strategic echelon. Second strategic echelon would come up once the fallout from the minefields had cleared, and they would go through there, and they would have a nuclear exchange of tactical nuclear weapons with the NATO forces, and basically the NATO forces in them, they would attrition themselves mostly out of existence. Then the third strategic echelon would come up, and it would sweep all the way over Europe through France, Spain, to the English Channel and beyond.
Right.
And then my question was, well, what then? And he said, then we grab all the merchant shipping and we go to North America. Now, the reason they were building the huge merchant marine is that they got the concept that they didn't want to wait to get the merchant shipping by stealing it from Europe, because after all, those ships might take off.
Right.
They might just flee. They might not be able to trap them in port.
And the U.S. would also, once we cross the Rhine River in West Germany, we would launch tactical nuclear weapons too as well. So the Soviets would have to just knock us off balance first. That's why they really and truly the best way to take world conquest, or if they're serious about taking out taking control of Western Europe back then, they would have to wipe out the United States. And once the United States strategic and command and control and strategic forces are pretty much crippled, then they can march at will.
Yeah, that's right. And so the real problem being in this whole process, the real problem is that I think about the Able Archer exercises and the
Yes.
B. Ryan and so on.
Yes.
And of course, I got this information from a KGB source, a man who was in a position to know what actually happened. And we almost had the Red Dawn type scenario unfold in 1983. And there's various occasions for this. Now, I have two versions. One is the American side of this. And Dr. Peter Vincent Pry has worked for the Office of Soviet Analysis, which was then Fritz Ermarth, CIA. And their job was to watch for the signs of a Russian nuclear attack on the West. And of course, in 1983, all the signs were there. But Fritz kind of was dismissive of all the signs. There was nothing, and Peter writes about it in his book War Scare. And so they kind of dropped the ball. They would have had us cold. And what is that they got ready for nuclear war. Our DPS satellites were seeing them get ready, but then we kind of dismissed it and said, oh, it's an exercise. It's not. And so we did not raise our levels. We did not get ready, because a lot of people don't know you can't just launch a nuclear rocket. You just can't. You have to launch rockets and have good effect from them. You have a period of intensive preparation at the missile launch sites. Something you see from satellites. You can tell there's all kinds of activity starts happening. This is where you get your pre-launch warnings. And that's why we have these satellites that are watching all the Russian missile sites and bomber bases and stuff. And this went on in 83. And of course, their excuse was, their KGB was told, yeah, they're Able Archer exercises. The Americans are going to attack us, so we got to attack them first. But all the defectors I talked to said, oh, that we knew that was nonsense. The Americans weren't preparing a war against us. They knew that was just a cover story. Right. So like what Peter told me years before he wrote his book, probably he was working on his book when he told me this. He said it came right up to the moment when the right moment to launch, and they had us, Peter said, they had us cold. If they had launched then, they would have won World War III. And I should tell the listeners, Redmond Simonson and James Dunnigan, who were at Strategy and Tactics magazine, Simulations Publications. They made realistic war games in the 1970s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
For the Reagan administration, the big problem in the Pentagon, they didn't have a realistic war game to the capabilities of the two sides. And these guys made realistic war games. They were able to assess military strengths and make a game, a playable game. And so they were tasked, they were given the contract to make the, there's a book on this, which I think is called War Games, if I'm not mistaken. And fascinating because I followed that when I was military strategy. I loved. I subscribed to Strategy and Tactics magazine, and I followed Simonson and Dunnigan's work at the time from the time I was a teenager. And they made this war game, and they had to argue because our admirals, for example, wouldn't allow them to make the game so our carriers could be hit by like nuclear torpedoes or something.
Right.
He said, "Look, your aircraft carrier." They almost bailed on the project because the admirals didn't want to admit their carriers could be destroyed. So they did get them to admit that. They made the war game. The first two games we played in the beginning of the Reagan administration, I think it was in 1982, maybe it was late 81. It was the red team, blue team. And the red team won both times. World War III, the red team won. That's how behind we got of the Soviets after the Carter years, right? Because we fell behind. It was Ford and Nixon partly. It was the post-Vietnam anti-military stuff. But they'd gotten ahead. And of course, an all-arms nuclear war is not the end of the world. There's more radiation around. There's lots of people who die, but the world is not destroyed. And of course, they made this game. The third time, so that's a lot of the Reagan era changes to weapons. To they had added all the ballistic missiles to help defend the fleets and stuff, and they improved a lot of things. Third time they played the game, we won. We stopped them.
No, thank God for that.
In '83 was right before we were figuring out. And '83, but they really needed till 8. And I think two of the things happened. You know who Roger Robinson was?
Of course, yes.
Roger Robinson was the head of Ronald Reagan's, I don't know if they called it the Office of Economic Warfare, but they were prosecuting an economic war to hurt the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was hurt.
It was. And Roger Robinson was one of the few Reagan-era officials. And by the way, he left in 1987 when Reagan was turning more towards open détente with the Soviet Union. Right. But Roger Robinson is really one of the examples, because he worked for various large banks, and he was a patriotic banker, I might add, and he really understood how credits and financial aid from Western loan institutions really propped up the Soviet Union, especially when we figured out the hard currency shortfalls from legal Soviet trade and legal Soviet exports. He's like, how were they able to hold their empire afloat? So go ahead, a little background on Roger Robinson. And now he's also on the Committee on the Present Danger towards China. He's involved with that now.
In fact, I spoke with him the day before yesterday.
Oh.
Yeah. So, and in fact, we talked about this subject, and he actually mentioned to me, he said, well, I was talking about, we've turned the corner on China now, and our economies pulling back from China. Very active in helping to do that. And, I was saying, this is dangerous, right? He said, yeah. And he mentioned 1983. And he said, what we did to the Soviet Union in 1983, he said Andropov made this decision, which they saw as this preparation for a strike on the United States in '83, because I think when you look at that they weren't going to have the merchant marine they wanted until '85. I think their real plan was to attack in '85, right? But a couple of factors, and we don't know exactly why, but why they didn't, like I asked Peter Price, said, well, they were all ready to strike us in '83. They had caught us with our pants down. Why didn't they strike? And Peter said, I don't know. I don't know why they didn't do it. But later, this KGB guy explained to me why. Now, we know Andropov, the speculation was that Andropov was sick. He was dying of kidney disease.
Mm-hmm.
And the speculation was their leader was ailing and he didn't. Well, it was Andropov's decision to stop the attack. But different than we would think. It's very interesting. You know that in the Soviet Union, the government is run by what they call the Iron Triangle.
Mm-hmm.
The Iron Triangle consists of the party at the top, the
Mm-hmm.
army, and the KGB.
Mm-hmm.
They all have, like, the party has administrative organs that spies on the KGB and the army.
Mm-hmm.
Administrative organs basically watches the KGB, and they've got commissars in the army.
Mm-hmm.
And then the KGB spies on the army and also watches the party. So
Mm-hmm.
guys with guns to each other's heads, making sure everybody's following the Politburo and the Central Committee say.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how it's parallel institutions, they call it. It's a Leninist system. Also the other name for it, the other aspect of it is democratic centralism.
Mm-hmm.
And but what happened? What this KGB guy told me, he said that we knew that it wasn't, that the West wasn't going to attack, but that we were getting ready. And he said the reason that it happened is that Brezhnev in his later years was ill.
Mm-hmm.
And so within the Politburo, an unbalance formed. Dmitry Ustinov was the defense minister.
Mm-hmm.
He had gone to Brezhnev one day about some things he wanted to do, preparing for war. And
Mm-hmm.
said, I don't feel good. I'm going home. You do whatever you want. And then
Mm-hmm.
Ustinov doing whatever he wanted.
Oh
And
boy.
Brezhnev was okay. And this became a problem because the army was driving the bus, and the army wanted the war to start when they were ready.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted the KGB to say, look, the West is getting ready to attack us with Abel Archer. And so this version of what happened was that Andropov was watching the army. They were saying that we needed to attack in '83, even though the Soviet Union wasn't entirely ready, because Americans were building up again.
Mm-hmm.
Buildup was going to change the balance back, and if we waited, we would lose our window, right? And they're economically hurting us
Mm-hmm.
for the Roger Robinson stuff. But anyway, why they didn't do it is Andropov was afraid that the army would take power during the war. And when everybody's in their bunker, they're all vulnerable. The party and the KGB are vulnerable to the army.
Mm-hmm.
And take over the state. The army would become too powerful politically that the Iron Triangle would be broken by the war. So I'm being distrustful of the generals, canceled the attack.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's from a KGB guy.
Mm-hmm.
Take it with a grain of salt. That story sounds more probable because they had us cold. Why wouldn't they go through it? It had to be a political decision.
Yes.
So we know that they had this long-range strategy that Golitsyn talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Did not involve war, which did not involve all the the risks of war. And so the question is, I think was an argument. Clearly, you can see it in the testimony of Golitsyn and some of the other defectors, that they had the army. You had Sokolovsky making the argument in
Mm-hmm.
military strategy about making the Leninists' Clausewitzian argument that it's always
Correct.
going to be war, right?
Yes.
And then you have KGB General Nikolai Mironov on the other
Mm-hmm.
side making the argument that that we could win without fighting, because he was a disciple of Sun Tzu, who said,
Mm-hmm.
"I've in wars winning without fighting, and we can do this super NEP, this fake collapse of fake liberalization of the Soviet
Mm-hmm.
that would disarm the West." And so there was this argument about which path to take, and
Mm-hmm.
being dialecticians, they believe taking both paths at once, allowing
Mm-hmm.
them to dialectically have a conflict within their own system, to have an
Mm-hmm.
argument, and then go with a synthesis of the two things.
Exactly.
And that synthesis was what produced this. And of course, there was a backlash against the generals in the post Andropov period. There were, you remember was it Matthias Rust who flew the plane to Moscow? And
Yes. Yes.
generals, but I was told that was opportunistic. They wanted to get rid of these generals. They didn't trust them. There was a helicopter accident where 5 colonel generals died in the same helicopter. I think that was in 87.
Mm-hmm.
There were a number of events indicative of a military purge ongoing. I mean, a blood purge in the Soviet Army.
Mm-hmm.
And there was then a backlash against the KGB in the 90s
Mm-hmm.
because when the collapse, the liberalization didn't work out as planned. They
Mm-hmm.
said, you were right. We should have attacked the United States. This plan has completely messed up everything. The
Mm-hmm.
photo has crippled us ideologically. It has caused the USSR. How do we put it back together again politically? Are
Mm-hmm.
actually drifting away from our control mechanisms? The whole 9 yards. So there was
Mm-hmm.
argument there as well. There's indications. So, and what I was told is again, the generals became politically dominant because the KGB was considered to have failed. And the reason they picked Putin is he was a KGB guy who the generals liked, who would take one thing generals don't like is to take political responsibility.
Yes.
They don't
Yes. Very true.
ability. And Putin was a guy that was willing to take the political responsibility. And the party, of course, was in the background. It was going underground and it was pretending not to be there. The
Mm-hmm.
party. So that's the background of that whole thing. So we had an almost Red Dawn in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Barely, and of course, Peter describes it in his book War Scare, Peter Pry. And then fast forward to now, and how has the strategy changed, from bombing, and I asked Colonel Lunev, I said, well, how would that work out? You bomb the United States, you destroy most of its military infrastructure, you land 10 divisions, paratroop and Marine. Isn't it a parade through conquered territory if you win the nuclear exchange? And he said, no. And I said, so you believe Skirdo's book? Because Skirdo said, no, you can't win that way. The American population is armed. And remember, the invasion troops are light troops. They're light infantry. Soviet
Right.
are very light infantry, so Soviet paratroopers. And, there's where you get your Red Dawn scenario. They didn't have very much heavy equipment when they'd land. And what Lunev told me was something that was in none of the books. He said they had wargamed this, and they determined that every one of those first landing 10 divisions within 2 weeks would be useless. He said it wouldn't be that they would be all wiped out, but they would suffer such heavy casualties that they couldn't do any kind of offensive operation with them. They'd basically have to withdraw the units, or, the men would be spent. The units would have such high casualties, they'd have to withdraw the units and bring in new ones.
Mm-hmm.
That, and I said, with just civilians with firearms? He says, yes. You would organize, columns of your own militia, and we had war gamed it out. And he said it is not, because you see, even after they nuke us, supposing they nuke us and they kill 50, 60 million people in the United States, at that time where the population was, I don't know, 260 million, we still have 200 million people, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how many of them would be armed? 10 million maybe would be carrying out firearms.
Yes. A
You know,
lot of us are armed.
against 125,000 Marines and paratroopers, not very good odds. I mean, those are professional troops. Those are, very professional. The only reason they'd have a chance was their professionalism. But there were really serious problems with an invasion on that scale. And that's why in 91, when they were negotiating with China about this, and this is one of the things Lunev said, was that the USSR army was going away. It wasn't going to be as big. And one of the meetings he was at in Moscow, they said, future nuclear world war against America is still still on the table. That's what we're going to do. We're ultimately planning for. And he said, Russia will only invade Alaska and parts of Canada. The Chinese will provide the tremendous manpower for invading the lower 48 states. And the Chinese don't care how many troops they lose. Russia, with its lower birth rate and so on, became sensitive to casualties on that scale. Because when you read Skirdo's book, you're talking about casualties in the millions, right? And Russia didn't want to absorb that. those kind of casualties, especially with if there's a nuclear exchange involved. There could be many casualties in other areas. And China was perfectly willing. And China, of course, wanted the land. That was a thing that he said. And of course, it would be an all-arms nuclear biological war. Like Japan said, we want a biological surprise attack on America, which may be already underway. We might be in the COVID may be the first stages of that.
Personally, I would agree, as we talked about in the last program, personally, it's my feeling based on your essay you wrote last year regarding the COVID-19 that it could have been an attack. I think it was well thought out. I encourage people to read the essay. I don't remember the title offhand. You also have a defecting Chinese virologist. I don't remember her name. It's a female virologist who said that. And now you're getting admissions in mainstream news sources. I think you have Chinese government scholars and think tank officials that are saying that we achieved a victory in the trade war and the biological warfare, which is hints that this is it. You're familiar with that. And also that China is now beefing up its biological warfare capability so they can win in a biological war. There's every indication that COVID-19, really, there is a very good chance that it was a deliberate attack. And notice that, remember when people like you and I and many others, anti-communists, were talking about it could have been an accidental leak from a virological institute, and we're called crackpots and everything. Now the mainstream media, in some ways, thankfully, is coming around to this. Isn't that funny? And I have to say, they probably will never tell us it's a COVID-19. And there is historical that it was an attack, and there's historical precedence. You look at the Kennedy assassination. There were people from Howard K. Smith and Lyndon Johnson who privately admitted to Howard K. Smith who the real culprit was. You have the testimony of General Ion Pacepa. You had the former East German HVA Foreign Intelligence General Marcus Wolf, who admitted that if we wanted to know who killed Kennedy, go ask Fidel Castro, for example. And there's many other sources of testimony. Why? Yeah. Because we did not, Edward J. Epstein, I think, wrote about this too as well. We did not, it was covered up, the Cuban and Soviet role in the assassination of Kennedy, because we did not want World War III. And I think if all the details are laid out about COVID-19, if somehow or another, if our government actually knows something, which I'm not 100% sure if they actually do or not, but they're not going to tell us because people would demand war with China from the left and the right and the center and the apolitical.
From the Fauci emails, it seems that they pretty much knew from the start.
Yes. Well, we also know that since 2014, I really have lost a lot of respect for Fauci with his role starting in 2014 in sharing all that know-how with the Institute of Virology in Wuhan. And, he needs to get his butt grilled. He needs his ass in the frying pan. Pardon my language.
I think he is circling the drain. I think he's circling the drain right now. I certainly hope so. But yeah, so this biological nuclear war idea. And of course, the Russians never had this idea of, the problem with viral weapons, by the way, is that the more rapidly spreading, and this is the way God made the universe, right? The more rapidly spreading a virus, the less lethal it is, You've got a few exceptions, but when you get to some of the more deadly, like Ebola is so unstable that it'll break out and it'll kill 100 people in some village somewhere, and then it's gone because it kills people too rapidly. Generally, a virus that can spread over a large population and kill a lot of people is really hard to make, even if you're trying to make it, because there is this tendency in nature that the more a pathogen spreads, the less lethal it is. At the same time, I think the most lethal microorganism is anthrax, if I'm not mistaken. And that is not communicable at all. If I had anthrax, I couldn't give it to you unless you cooked me and ate me, but you didn't cook me enough, right? Then you could get gastrointestinal anthrax. But I can't sneeze and give you anthrax, but I can sneeze and give you the common cold. Well, what the Chinese did with these, they got interested in these bat viruses, these SARS viruses. And my understanding is now the admission is that there are 3 DNA from, or RNA rather, it's an RNA virus, RNA from 3 different viruses in it. Of course, it's a SARS base with HIV and malaria. It affects the red blood cells like malaria, and it's got the effect. I don't know if you saw the hour and 34-minute testimony from Dr. McCullough over there at Texas A&M University. It's on Rumble. Just everybody, it's fascinating. Is not really, it doesn't infect the lungs. What is the lung effects in this is it's micro blood clotting is what destroys the lung. And it causes the platelets in the blood to stick together, and also there's deprivation of the blood's ability to carry oxygen. And the main cause of death in most of these COVID-19 cases is from blood clotting. The first 12 patients in Hamburg, 7 of the 12 died of blood clotting. And I have a friend that died, a former co-worker in California who died in November. And I really strongly suspect she was over. By the way, it's mostly people. The number one cofactor is obesity or being overweight. And the two thing is age. The more overweight and the older you are, the more vulnerable you are to the virus and pre-existing conditions like diabetes. But it's, and I think we can, if we look back at the virus, it was killing a lot of people at first in Wuhan, in northern Italy, when it first came out in New York. But then it very quickly went down to where, oh, it's only killing, 0.5% of the people that get it. I think that if you're over 80, you have a 7% chance of dying, which isn't that high, right? It's, you have a 90, that means you have a 93 chance, if you're 85 years old and you get the virus, you have a 93% chance of survival. That's pretty good. But the problem is, I think it was this Luc Montagnier a year ago who said it's a biological weapon, it's engineered, and he said it's a moderate to high mutating virus, and it's going to mutate down to where it's less harmful very quickly. And that prediction's come true. It just isn't as lethal as it was. They had doctors dying and dentists dying at first in China and in northern Italy. There hasn't been, it's a long, the nurses and doctors aren't dying, of it. People who get it, they have, both of my nieces had it and they did fine. It was like a little small cold. Younger people, if you're under 50 years of age and you're not overweight or don't have a pre-existing condition, you're just going to glide through this. But anyway, getting back to the war thing about it being a war, it's like, my big question is that, are we in the preparatory period before this Red Dawn scenario? And how does the Red Dawn scenario unfold under these conditions? Right.
Well, did you want to discuss, before you continue, I don't mean to interrupt, you probably will bring it up, is the secret speech of PLA General Chi Hao-shin. How does that factor into all this?
Yeah, people really, they really poo-poo that speech. They say it's a fraud and stuff, and people superficially look. When I first read it, I just said, it's too crazy. I don't believe it. And a Russian friend of mine called me up and he said, no, you need to read it again. And I did. And I had not read it carefully enough. But stuff in the speech was exactly what Lunev had told me. Of course, it was Epoch Times published the speech in, I think it was January, February of 2005 on their site. Archive. I reproduced it and put it on my site. It was Chinese speakers who didn't have particularly good English who created the initial copy, and I made some corrections where there's some grammatical errors in the English. I improved their translation just to make it grammatically correct. But so it made easier reading. But if you read that thing carefully, and I've read it many, many times, I've studied it, and there is no doubt in my mind that it's authentic after I studied it, because what Lunev was telling me, I didn't publish it was kind of, weren't supposed to talk about it. He had tried to write about it, and the CIA wouldn't let him put it in his book.
Ah, okay, so there you go. See, why, if you're allowed to talk about this, why? Why was the CIA not talked about it? Was it toxic groupthink? Is it business interests which controlled the government that didn't want this? What's going on here?
Yeah, you probably all the above. I think, and this is what I was told at the time in the late '90s when I did an event with Lou Nevin, Washington, and a billionaire who funded right wing things was there. And he basically, I met with his advisor. I think we talked about this, right?
Offline we did. And you talked about it in a public interview too as well.
Yeah. And I don't know if I named his advisor was McMichaels. And he said, we want you to stop talking and writing about this because we're going to get SDI, we're going to get national missile defense for America because the financial elite in America and the industrial elite, they want to invest in China. They want to do business with China and Russia. And this was in 1999. And it was like, and nobody's going to be able to stop them. So what you're doing is you're just wasting your breath and your time. We just got to get missile defense and we'll be fine. Well, in my view, these people, this is crazy. You have to
I think
talk.
it's more than crazy. I think it's actually a version of evil and
It's crazy.
hubris.
Oh
It's
yeah.
I'm sorry to say it's fucked up because
Oh,
they know how bad these governments are. I remember the debates of PNTR for China. I even wrote an editorial or a letter to the editor opposing PNTR for China. I watched the debates on C-SPAN. All these multinationals, I have nothing against rich people because they're rich. We don't have a problem with that on this show. But they have, and conservatives have been very guilty on this. And I was a conservative. And, saying that money is free speech and they're job creators and we got to worship them, exhibit sycophancy. This has opened the door to the decline of the United States. It has fucked things up with the POW MIA issue, which is horrible. Read
well,
Joseph Douglas's book.
yeah,
Horrible.
horrible. Well, you see, it's not only evil, it's stupid. It's evil and stupid. And this is why I'm
Well, of
sorry.
course, because they'll be killed in the end.
I get really angry with these conspiracy theorists who say, oh, the communists are nothing. It's the evil banksters. The bankers, these people are so stupid, they've just committed their own suicide. Do you
Well,
understand?
it's competing power centers.
It's,
It's
yeah,
competing power centers.
yeah.
Look, I can't stand the globalists. I'm anti-globalist. Doesn't mean I don't think we should get along with other countries. But as I talk about in the second volume of my book, Turning the Page, where, yeah, I do come across maybe as very leftish populist, but ultimately our intention is to
Right.
save some semblance of a free society. There's a lot of stuff of psychology, of history, of economics. There's a lot of things going on within the capitalist class, and you can also lump, truth be told, the capitalist class as one unifying class characteristics. Chris Hedges talks about this, the
Yeah.
different types of capitalism. You have penny capitalism, regional capitalism, which as a leftist he approves, and then the stateless, rootless, well, I hate to use the word rootless because of the progeny of the word, let's just call stateless and nationless.
We'll end
Uh,
up being called an anti-Semite, so you don't want to say that. And
Yeah, well, rootless is also rootless cosmopolitans. That's a Stalinist anti-Jewish phrase, and I'm Jewish, and
Nazis liked it too.
yeah, all the
Yeah.
crappy actors in history.
But I should say yes. No, there are good billionaires. There are good people, but there is this look in general. Not everybody. I don't want to accuse everybody. It's not fair, but there has been a moral decay in the elites of the West. There was a lot more morality, and in this moral decay, greed, quite frankly, has made these people look. If a person, you have to have moral discernment and actual deep moral orientation to see that doing business with murderers, mass murderers, torturers, the leaders of the Soviet Union and China especially. China was the most mass murdering regime in the history of man. They killed more Chinese than anybody, and Mao Zedong was a psychopath. And the people around him, there's something very dark about all those people. Very, very dark. I mean, forcible organ transplants is an industry in China.
You think, with Western European and American medical companies participating in it too? I mean, the whole thing is, this is why, and we can go into it in a different show, this is why I've come to the conclusion where I abandoned this whole limited government ideology, because that's nothing but a phrase to basically disguise the fact that the private sector oligarchs own the store. And there, we have to do, I mean, we can do this in a different show, but I will, and we'll go on to the next.
Before we do another show right here, let me go back, cycle back to what you just said, which is what I've been working on and what my column last week was about, or earlier this week. It's Saturday. It's still this week. Talking about, is the vaccine part of the attack vector? There's a question. People like Michael Yaden are saying this vaccine doesn't make sense. Why are they pushing it? You know who's pushing it. It's the left is pushing it hardest of anybody. Have other people, other microbiologists saying, no, there's something terribly wrong here. Now, you just said something. You said our medical industries, first of all, our pharmaceutical companies are in bed with the Chinese. They are. All these precursors for making our medicines come from China. But now we went to this really dark thing about forced organ donors, right? They take people in China. Oh, you're in a labor camp. You're the right blood type. We're going to harvest your body, right? So this is what they do, and then they sell it to Western companies. So think about the blackmail. I just want people to think, if you're a pharmaceutical company or a medical company, and trafficking in this, by the way, because we have laws and they don't on this, because they're a lawless order, like George Orwell described communism in his book. They're a lawless order. We're a law and order. If you are a medical company and you take organs from China under the table, because you know how much they go for here, you know how much it costs, you know how much money these people make. This is what you are now subject to blackmail by the Chinese.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
You have enriched yourself, but now if the Chinese go and tattle to you, if they somehow allow it to leak out what you've done, you're going to go to prison. So think about the whole thing. And this is the thing about compromise, about all the businessmen that do business in China. They go over there. Do they end up getting lured into honey traps?
They do.
Underage children,
They do.
Yes.
They did that in East Germany. They lured underage children for the Stasi. This came out in the British press. And the whole thing is just so diabolically sick. So
how much of our biological attack can that our own pharmaceutical companies and medical industries have been penetrated, just the way our military and our intelligence services and our government and our politics have been penetrated by the what we used to call the communist bloc of the agents of China. And I pose that question very seriously. People say, it's a conspiracy theory. No, it's a serious question about a war. I am saying we're in a biological war. You just found out, nobody's denying it now, that COVID-19 was a weapon. They made it in a lab. It's not a natural occurring virus. The bat soup thing from the market, the street market, was fake. It was a fake. I think that the explanation that it accidentally escaped is fake. And I think I said this before.
Yes.
It was released into the population in Wuhan in time to be festering throughout Wuhan right at Chinese New Year's.
Exactly.
The travel date where you would spread it. Is that a coincidence? That can't be. I don't believe in coincidences like that. I just don't believe it. So, but getting back to the Red Dawn thing.
Yeah.
That I have to say with Red Dawn, and with the Red Dawn thing, the biological attack is to basically weaken us. Territory period that Viktor Suvorov writes about in Spetsnaz. only it's a super preparatory period in which they can, according to General Chiao Chen, and we mentioned his speech, since the Chinese have to do the invasion of the United States,
Hmm.
what is the biggest problem? The large population we have here.
Exactly.
And if they can thin the herd, and he talks in his speech, if you go to my site, grnyquist.blog, it's one of the first. You have to scroll back. It's like the second article I put up there after the first one I did on Diana West's book about Russiagate. And so they Chiao Chen said the idea is to kill 100 to 200 million Americans, right? What do we got? We don't know for sure. 330, 40 million people here. So that is, they want to kill roughly between 1/3 and 2/3 of the population, just under 1/3 to 2/3. That's their goal, 100 to 200 million people. I think at the time he gave the speech, that was, we had 300 million people, and that was the number of 1/3 to 2/3. Well, you look at the virus and you look at the vaccine, the virus is not going to kill that many people. So there must be a follow-up attack, or it could be the vaccine as a vector.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're looking at this. And then there's the other day, now you saw the news this past week when Biden said, because Biden's under tremendous pressure. We need to investigate, since it's come out, the thing was made in their lab. We need to investigate the origin of this virus. And the Chinese immediately come out with, the Chinese people need to prepare for nuclear war.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right? We need to prepare for nuclear war. And you've got all these preparations already underway in China and Russia. They've been talking about war in both countries being imminent for months. Now you have Chinese saying to their people, all good Chinese must come home now. And the Russians, all good Russians must come home to Russia now. And then you didn't see Russia dissolved its sovereign fund of dollars, the dollar-denominated element of its sovereign fund, $186 billion. Russia turned it into gold and other currencies. Now, it's a pittance. People say, oh, that's a pittance. Yeah, but it's a sign. It's like, well, I want my $2,000 back before they go out of business, right?
Exactly. That's what it is.
Or you can have a nuclear war fire sale. It doesn't matter if it's $2,000. I want my $2,000 back. So they got their 186,000. They converted it into something else. Because, in a nuclear war, what's the value of the U.S. dollar?
Nothing. Zero.
It's probably zero. So, and you see that now we have an emergency economy. We've got our own underground bunkers. We've got our preparations aren't as great as theirs.
No kidding. Look what happened with COVID-19. There was a disaster, our response. And I'm sorry, I go against, one of the few unsung heroes in the Trump administration was Peter Navarro, who really was warning the Trump administration of the problems with COVID-19. And people like Larry Kudlow and Jared Kushner and all the other trickle-down Reagan-type people, they were just like, oh, it's going to be fine, and we got to prop up Wall Street and this and that, and everybody go to work, even though more and more people are getting sick, and no, we can't sanction China and all the rest of it. In my opinion, those folks brought down the Trump presidency from day one. He made a faithful compromise with those people.
You make a very good point. And, it's like, I think I was the first person in the American media, and Epoch Times picked up my story, and I got discussed in Zero Hedge. They discussed my article, Zero Hedge. I wrote, I think it was early February. The thing was just getting out of China. And I said, this is a biological weapon, and it's probably connected to Chiao Chen's speech. That's basically what I said. I made that argument. I said, this is what we need to look at. Now, I was the first person to say that, and I hate to be right, but now everybody's coming around. This is what I've always said. People say you're a nut. I'm not worried. If I'm wrong, I'm glad. It's a win-win for me. If I'm wrong, I'm glad I'm wrong. But if I'm right, I'm not happy about that. But everybody is going to sound like me. So if I'm a kook, you're going to be sounding like a kook pretty soon too. Because if I'm right, everybody is going to know what I know and think the way I do. It's inevitable in my view. I want to be wrong. I got to be honest. I want to be wrong. But this is rather, because I analyze things as a strategist. And in strategy, you always, in a strategy game, you look at the tells. he moved this piece here. Why? What is his next move? There's another move coming. Okay, what's the logic of what he's doing? That's what you look at when you look at Russia and China. What is the logic of their next move? And, I've often talked about a sequence, and this is where you get to your Red Dawn. I think we've talked about The Silent Invasion. We haven't talked about that book yet.
No, we have not. We have not talked about Scott Gulbranson's book.
Yeah, Scott Gulbranson was now this is a very interesting book, and it really has not he did not get what he deserved really from this. Scott Gulbranson was a reporter on the main San Diego newspaper. He developed a friendship with the Tijuana policeman, reporter. And this Tijuana policeman started telling him pre-Red Dawn kind of preparation things. This policeman was, obviously the police in Tijuana are corrupt. They're working with the Mexican mafia.
Right.
And this policeman was eventually murdered. He was assassinated, but probably for talking to Gulbranson. And I think last time I talked to Scott Gulbranson, and he's younger than me. And this is like, oh my gosh, it's got to be 15 years ago. No, maybe 10 years ago I talked to him. He had cancer. So I don't know that he's alive anymore, Scott. But anyway, this Tijuana policeman had been making trips, had been ordered to make trips to drive supplies out to this encampment in the desert. And in the encampment, there were Russian special forces, Chinese special forces, and Cuban special forces. And in their main command tent, they had a big map of the border area. Out like they were like a military map. He made these supplies, and of course, he was supposed to keep quiet about it. Now, there's lots of stories like this that had come out of Mexico. When I worked for Newsmax, the former editor, chief editor of Newsmax would talk to me about the information that was pouring in, because I was writing some articles about this back in 1999. And they would have people say, we're Mexican Americans living in Texas, and our relatives have a ranch down on the border, and the Chinese have taken it over and killed our relatives. Right? And the info. So what Gulbranson this policeman said, look, the Chinese are offloading weapons at Ensenada. They control the port at Ensenada, and Chinese ships are constantly going there. And there was, I think Michael Waller wrote a piece, and in 1999 or 2000, about how there were these secret convoys of Chinese and Mexican ships going to Ensenada, and they actually military escorts. And they were bringing stuff to Ensenada, and the speculation was it drug trafficking? But Scott Gulbranson said, and he went out there to watch the unloading of these ships and he was introduced to some fishermen who'd seen this. They were offloading weapons, was Gulbranson's statement. And of course, then he was looking at whether they were storing them in Mexico or crossing the border with them. And so this is all very, very, very interesting material. But what's really interesting is what Lunev told me about this. And I asked him about this scenario as we were talking about an invasion. And he said, the invasion plan for North America is based on the German invasion of Norway.
Yes, you wrote about this in WorldNet Daily. Continue.
Operation Vezireba, right? Operation Vezireba was the German operation to invade. And what they did is Norway was a neutral country in 1940 at the beginning of April. And of course, the British were preparing to mine Norway's harbors to block the movement especially in the wintertime, of iron ore from Sweden out of Narvik. Strategically important. Norway was a strategically important country. And Hitler knew that there was a British-French plan to occupy Norway. And so what they decided they had already stockpiled, the Germans, uniforms and weapons in Norway. But Lunev said it's the Brandenburg Regiment. This is where you have Germans entering Norway as tourists. Then they go to these depots and they get the uniforms and they get the guns, and then they go grab an airfield. And then the German planes come in with the mountain infantry the planes fly in and they land and you've secured the airfield. things like that. You have merchant ships that, because Germany and Norway had this trade. So the merchant ships are coming, and they don't come as an invasion convoy, they come as single ships. So the British didn't really bother with many of them. So but they had troops, and they arrived in the Norwegian ports, and they offloaded. And of course, there was a German invasion task force going up Oslo Fjord. That was a famous battle. I think
Mhm.
one of the German pocket battleships or whatever got sunk there by the Norwegian guns. But they most of the invasion was done in this very stealthy way by using
Mhm.
regular commerce as a vehicle to get into the country with pre-stockpiling of supplies. And so they wanted to do that to the United States on a much bigger scale. And as you know, Lunev testified to Congress about these arms, including stockpiling nuclear weapons
That's
inside,
right. That's right.
biological and chemical weapons in secret caches. And of course, this is basically what Goldbranson was saying the Chinese were doing, that they were setting up these secret arms caches in Mexico and smuggling some of them. Part of the book is about how they were smuggling them across the border, corrupting border officials. And what Lunev said is they smuggled them across the border in the same routes they used to smuggle drugs. Because as you know, my friend Joe Douglas wrote Red Cocaine, drug trafficking and organized crime is an important dimension of all this for compromising officials, for bribing, for laundering money, but also these drug trafficking routes, you can move weapons, including WMDs, through these routes. That's
And
why
it,
the border here right now is really dangerous. That border should
yes.
be shut now. We're in a possible pre-war situation. That border should be secure, but it's
Now,
not.
but what now? And I know Gulbranson, I believe, addressed this in his book and in interviews, I think, with Ryan Morrow too, as well, years and years ago. But tell us, why did U.S. officials look the other way? What happened? Were they aware of this under the George W. Bush administration, Bill Clinton's administration, about Gulbranson's revelations of Chinese weapons transfers to Mexico, as well as the presence of, according to Gulbranson, North Korean, Cuban, and Chinese soldiers in Mexico in isolated training camps? I mean, where's the U.S. government in all this?
Well, that's the thing is I think I talked to you in one of our earlier episodes here about the way our analysts are trained and about the one that I first met when I was just beginning in graduate school. He was getting his
Mhm.
PhD. He was going to work for Rand. He was going to end up at the CIA. And then
Hmm.
wrote a paper about how none of the guerrilla communist Marxist groups in Colombia were connected to Cuba or the Soviet bloc.
Right.
And it's like, this kind of analysis, and of course it was a closet Marxist, Dr. David Easton, who forbade me to even question his thesis in any way. So there was already a group think. It was imposed. You're not allowed to think certain things, and you're supposed to laugh at certain other things.
Mm.
And so the logical analysis, proper factual checking, and of course, I think I'd mentioned that I checked with one of our former retired CIA guy, and I said, "Well, is that true what this guy wrote in the paper?" And he just laughed and said, "I wasn't in Colombia then. I was working in Cuba, and my wife was in the queue with the Colombian guerrillas who were training in Cuba." So, the guy was completely wrong. They are
Well,
just
that's contradicted even by Reagan era State Department reports, like Cuba's renewed support for violence, published in 1981. It talks all about how Cuba was helping the guerrillas all over Central and South America, including Colombia.
real.
I
In
mean,
this,
it's
yeah,
sickening.
problem, if you're going to be, this is just to make it short and sweet. This is the problem. When you have an academic system that's dominated by Marxists, and your career, whether you go up or, and I was anti-Marxist, so I wanted to be an analyst, there was no chance that I was going to get this job. So that's why I'm out here independent. I'm doing it anyway, even though I'm not being paid to do it. I'm doing it, the job I wanted to do for the government. I'm out here doing it. So pay attention here, because the government is screwed up. These guys were educated by Marxists. They were brainwashed, or their mentality was tweaked. So you could present them the facts, but they have been given a way of interpreting around it. So they will never, they'll, so as far as Gulbranson's information, Branson is a crackpot. He's a kook. He's a journalist on the ground talking to fishermen in Mexico, talking to a Tijuana policeman, getting the story on the ground. He's the best, there's another word for a journalist. He's a spy. I mean, journalists do the same that secret agents do. They try to get a story, right? They try to get information, but their information is to be given to everybody, whereas a spy is just for his government. So you look at Branson, he has this good information. It's very, and he really suffered doing that. To tell the truth is to hurt your own reputation now, because the big lie is so prevalent, because the enemy has gotten inside of our media, has gotten inside of our government, has gotten control of our intellectual machinery. And so people don't know, Matthew Lohmeyer, we talked about him. He said it's in the Pentagon. He talks about the Marxist takeover of America. So no, they don't have the mental equipment or the internal constitution to say 2 + 2 is 4, and to say we need to look at Branson. That was like forbidden. They were not going to look at it. I mean, like me. Now, I'll give them this credit. I met a former head of CIA counterintelligence who was teaching, this is 20 years ago, at Texas A&M. His name was James Olson, a very famous former CIA higher up. And I met him, and he said, when I met him, he said, "Oh, Langley sends me your stuff all the time."
Well, there is light at the end of the tunnel.
The CIA was reading me, and he said, "They think you're brilliant, but they think you're wrong." That was interesting to hear.
Well,
and,
yeah, that's really something else. And apparently some CIA people even read my stuff, I've been told.
Yes, I'm sure they do. But the thing is that their education is so different. And see, worldviews, colored people, I tried to, one of the hardest disciplines I tried to do was when I would read Soviet stuff, and I'd say, because you read this Leninist stuff, and if you're not a Marxist, it's a bit offensive, and your brain wants to shut down. When you read things that are against what you think, I had to teach myself to see the other guy's point of view.
Yes.
Entertain this, to take it in and say, all right, I'm a Marxist-Leninist today. I'm gonna do this. And I did acting classes. I liked theater when I was in college. And that's, what the method actors, they actually try to become the character, right?
Exactly.
I use that, because I got one of the method acting books here, An Actor Prepares and stuff. And so I knew that. And I thought, I have to use this, because otherwise I can't concentrate it. I can't really absorb it, because you can't be opposed to something when you read it. You have to be open-minded, even about communism. And so you can never understand something unless you go internally into that thing. Sorry, I think somebody called me again. Are you there?
No worries. No worries. We're continuing. Yeah.
Did I drop out?
No, you're good. You're fine. You'll continue, okay. Please.
But yes, so you have to really put yourself in their spot, because you can't understand their thinking unless you read it and you want to become them. You kind of got to merge with them. And then all of a sudden you start to understand Marxism and Marxism-Leninism and their strategic thinking, because an enemy relationship is a kind of intimate relationship. It really is. And how do I say that? Is that, Sun Tzu famously made the statement that if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you will not be defeated in 100 battles. Well, a lot of people don't know themselves either. But if you know your enemy, you know how he thinks, you understand what you're in for. But that requires a real flexibility. And most people, they cannot adopt, even for a moment, the thinking of a different point of view. And I think when we're talking about this Red Dawn thing, especially, just think about it. You're a Soviet or a Chinese general, and it's how are you going to invade the United States? It has to be a nuclear war. You need to prepare the ground with biological attack. You need to lower you look at it, this is all logical. And you need to have why do you need arms dumps in Mexico? because you don't know how many merchant ships of yours are going to, in your merchant fleet, are going to be destroyed. And if you need to land 1 million troops, how are you going to supply them unless you have already created large arms supply dumps? Now look at what the Mexican mafia is famously under the Russian mafia. The LA Times has done pieces where they have said, front page LA Times story, LA Times has said the Russian mafia is the boss mafia over the Mexican mafia. Isn't that? So now you've got these drone attacks by the Mexican mafia. They're killing hundreds of people, including politicians and electoral candidates. What's going on below the border? What is that about? Why the intensive violence and mass assassinations in Mexico now? Have you heard about this at all?
Yeah, I have. And continue on that for the benefit of the audience. And then I think this would be after you're done talking about that. I'd like to switch into a significant situation with Latin America, of which Mexico is part of North America, but there's
Right.
this encirclement going on in Latin America. And then lastly, I want to talk about where the American hard left, the tanky left, and yes, I include DSA and other groups that are fake democratic socialists. So I want to include that where they fit into this scenario too. So go ahead about those assassinations, because that's very important here.
Yeah. So you think really that it's about drugs? Could be about drugs in some of it, but no, I think that these assassinations are probably political, and that there is an impending, they need to get control of Mexico on the ground. Maybe not all of Mexico, but regions in Mexico. And this is my guess of what's happening, because it's all, everything is the context. We've got a biological war going on. Chinese are telling their people to get ready for nuclear war. The Russians are getting ready. They're telling their people to come home from abroad. These are all pre-war signs. They're getting rid of their sovereign funds. And then you've got these mass assassinations, these drone attacks in Mexico. So this is extremely, this is a tell. Mexico is very important for them for pre-positioning troops. Now, I'm not talking, you hear these crazy stories. Oh, there's millions of Chinese troops. No, it's not. They can't do that. They'd be caught. Of course not.
Yeah.
You've probably heard the story about the Mexican who stopped down in Yucatan to relieve himself while he was driving, and he stepped through the bushes and he saw Chinese tanks.
Yeah.
That's possible, but it's not large amounts, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's not a whole army, but because if you go down to San Diego, there's no pillboxes. There's no troops standing around. There's no, it's defense.
They're not stupid. They're not stupid. They're far from stupid.
If you had 3 battalions of Chinese troops, and by the way, Chinese are all over Mexico. You go to Mexico City, you see Chinese everywhere. And there's certain areas in Mexico, there's lots of Chinese. We don't even have a right number. I had my Brazilian friend, Alan Dos Santos, that I did all those shows with. Alan came to the United States through Mexico. He's been doing a show from the U.S. because they put a hit on him in Brazil, the communists.
Really? Who put a hit on him?
The communists in Brazil.
That's
and he had to leave the country, but he was in Mexico. And he waiting. I'm not going to say what city he was in. He was waiting, and he goes. I talked to him when he was in Mexico, waiting for his work visa to come through.
Mm-hmm.
And, he said, "Jeff, I'm kind of worried. There's lots of Chinese here. This place is swarming Chinese, right?" Well, see, the idea is that these Chinese are also, whatever business they're doing there, whatever economic activity they're involved in, they're also reservists. And if they've stockpiled the weapons, let's say they're men of military age. Let's say there's 30,000 of them in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 36,000. Okay, that's enough to make 3 divisions of troops. A division of Chinese troops could take and secure San Diego in a matter of hours. I mean, it could be, you talk about a blitzkrieg, because it's right there on the border.
Yeah.
That border, you could just walk right across there. The border guards, are equipped with pistols.
Yeah, there's no contest.
They
And
get
by the way, GRU defector Viktor Suvorov in his book Spetsnaz talked about these infiltration tactics, posing as tourists,
yes,
replacing their Soviet embassies with more fit-looking men and women, using merchant ships and other covers of commercialism to ultimately launched stages of invasions. And, perhaps COVID-19 is one of those stages of Viktor Suvorov, what Viktor Suvorov reveals of Spetsnaz and Red Army strategy too, as well. So I wanted to slip that in there too, as well.
because there's a marker that I want everybody to know. People say, well, how do we know when it's going to happen? Because they could, just like in 1983, they could come right up to the brink and they could chicken out. They could say, you know what, we don't want to do this because you're going to be killing, at least 1 billion people, maybe a couple billion people, because a war like this destroys the whole world economy, disrupts the food supply, disrupts capitalism. You have economies all over the globe collapsing, and my belief is it'll collapse the Russian and Chinese economies.
Mm-hmm.
They're idiots themselves. They're evil. Evil is kind of its own kind of stupid. And whether you look at Hitler or you look at the communists, why haven't the communists taken over the world already? Because evil is its own kind of stupid. And so here's a marker, and it comes from Viktor Suvorov's book Spetsnaz, his Spetsnaz's First World War. They've collected massive amounts of blackmail, dirt on our politicians, on our entertainers, on our diplomats, on our generals, on all of our leaders. They've collected these things on all of these people. And having collected all these things on everybody, they will release it before a war. And they'll also release fake dossiers. They'll throw in things. They'll say people who are honest are bad.
Mm-hmm.
But so much dirt in such a short period of time, and we'll go, he was my hero, he was bad.
Mm.
Will destroy faith in the government on the eve of a war.
Mm.
This is a marker that about 2 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, before a war, this stuff will be released. And Suvorov talked about it. And it will be to destroy our morale, to create chaos, because it's part of the overture. It's part of the preparatory period. They have to break our morale, break our trust in our own government, and it could be what the vaccine's about. It may be that Dr. McCullough says that 10,000 people have died of the vaccine in Europe. 4,000 on May 16th, they gave the interview. 4,000 Americans had died of the vaccine, and 10,000 have been hospitalized. Now, that's a small number of people compared to the number of people dying of it. But if a vaccine, we still don't know the full effects. If the vaccine is injuring, we see in Israel the bad effects used there. And with the heart inflammation on young men, and of course then the reproductive harm in young women of childbearing already. So this destroys, since the government pushed this destroys faith in government.
Yes.
It undermines,
Yes.
even if it's a relatively small number of people, the fact that the government lied and pushed people to doing things that would harm them, it discredits our own government. So
It does.
this could be what it isn't necessarily that this may not work out to be killing a lot of people, but it may be just to demoralize us. These are the kind of preparatory period biological attacks. Look at the cyber attacks on the pipeline, on
Right.
supply, right? Pipeline meat supply. What's next? Power infrastructure grid. This is right out of Suvorov's book about the preparatory period, what he calls the overture, the pre-World War III. But by the way, I'm sorry, every single sign that you would expect to see from reading the defector literature has been happening, and we're just going straight for it. And I've never said this before. I've expected them to do it at some point, but and I've said, well, I don't know how long in the future it is. I didn't expect it to go this long, but it looks like they're finally doing it. They're finally going to unfold it. And so, of course, it is this Chinese attack from the Mexican border. We don't know how many troops. It would be Russian paratroops and Marines coming into Alaska,
Mm-hmm.
trying to secure, they try to secure San Diego. They might try to come into Vancouver because the Chinese have a presence in the Vancouver area. And
Mm-hmm.
these open port areas, and they try to win the first strikes to clear our Navy because they really can't bring the main forces, invasion forces, across until they've cleared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's another question. We don't know how good their weapons work. We don't know how that would play out.
And we don't know. Now, where does Latin America play into this? Because it's very important. You have a resurgence of the Latin American left, the communist left, the Sao Paulo Forum, which was formed by Fidel Castro and Lula da Silva, who seems like may even come back into power, and he's now become much more open about his communist radicalism. He's the head of the Workers' Party and not a friend of the United States. You look at Gennady Zyuganov in 2006. He was the head of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation with ties with Putin. And he talks about how Latin America was becoming red as far back as 2006. That's a quote from him. You look at Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, Bolivia is back under the control of Evo Morales' party, the MAS, which is the Movement for Socialism. I forget the full title. So they're back, at least I think, with a parliamentary majority, if I recall correctly, in Bolivia. So I see this as surrounding the southern flank of the United States. And when you have more and more Latin American countries, that's falling to communism or some form of anti-American leftism. That's the strategy of encirclement. Lenin and Stalin talked about in their writings using the third world as being the rear of imperialism because it contains a lot of the resources. Of course, the free market people and the corporate globalists, in their infinite wisdom, and being very sarcastic, they outsourced a lot of industry. Why? Because of foreign policy reasons, and because of ideology, and because of greed and adherence to this Milton Friedman, Theodore Levitt, Michael Jensen, who actually denounced it before he passed away, I think, or something, of shareholder value. Everything that's important is all about shareholder value. This is why I abandoned free market stuff. So all this stuff, we outsource our industry to all over the world, the rear of imperialism. And the communists know our capitalists, corporate capitalists, better than American citizens and American conservatives know. So you have that in play. You have the control of the natural resources. You have the psychological effect of the encirclement south of our border. Where does that play? What did the defectors say? Cuban, Venezuelan, Russian, Chinese? What have they told you about the encirclement south of the border, especially post 1991? Have they told you anything about this?
The main one was Hugo Chavez's pilot in chief of air staff.
Mm-hmm.
For his name now, because it's been 20 years, almost 20 years. I think it was January of 2002 that I interviewed him.
Yeah.
I think that's for Financial Sense. And if people want to go back to the Financial Sense archive, if it's still up, they can see that it was very interesting. I spent quite a bit of time speaking with him. I don't speak Spanish, so they had a translator because his English, so they had a good translator. And he said Hugo Chavez was a communist. He was not a social democrat. He was not a leftist. He was he's a Marxist-Leninist, basically. So, and I said, really? He said, yeah, he's that. And he said he was trying to build a communist bloc in Latin America from which to launch attack on the United States. And he said economic attack, terrorist attack, and all-out military attack. Every form of attack you can imagine. And he wanted, of course, he went to Moscow, he went to Beijing to say, when he went to Beijing, he said, I'm a Maoist.
Yes.
He knew they were the guys, that the communist bloc was still there. And that's why there is, his successor, Mr. Maduro, has Chinese and Russian troops in his country and Cuban troops in his country.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, they're there. And there is a convoy right now of ships coming from Iran that has, I guess, torpedo boats strapped on its deck. And my understanding is that they may be missiles being transported or some kind of weapons transported on their way to Venezuela now.
Mhm.
And there's a debate within the US government about whether we're going to intercept this and not allow this convoy that's came around the Cape. It's coming up.
Mhm.
I don't know where it is, and I just heard about it in the news the other day. I think the day before yesterday.
Mhm.
So this is Venezuela is a place they want to build up. That's why the Russian and the Chinese anti-aircraft troops are there. That's why Russian warships have made ports of call there. Why Russian bombers, long-range bombers, have flown all the way there and then back. And it's this is part of and it's, by the way, it's an oil-rich country, and it's
Mhm.
located on the North Caribbean shore of South America. So this is pretty significant as a country. And of course, that and Cuba together form this kind of power. And Nicaragua is being armed. They're building bases in Nicaragua. And of course, there's something going on in Mexico. So yes, the encirclement is, and of course, the Chinese would like to get into, you heard the controversy about Chinese troops being in Canada.
Mhm.
Created a bit of a
Yes.
for having a military exercise with Chinese troops in Canada. Well, the Canadian government came under pressure, and I guess they're not going to let it happen. But imagine
Mhm.
they let a whole division or two divisions of Chinese troops into Canada, and they suddenly decided to turn south, and there was a war. I mean, you get the troops here under any pretext, right?
Yes.
And of course, we're not talking about large numbers of troops. Again, we're talking about, like, with the Russian plan in the 1980s, which was to bring 10 divisions. It's not a lot of troops. We're talking about 125,000 troops, maybe, um, somewhere in that number, coming in, and just to hold certain places, key positions, so that the main invasion can arrive after the nuclear part of the war is done. Because the first part of the war is about achieving strategic nuclear supremacy. And that's the part that kind of, if you can get that, you can win just on that, is the theory.
Yes.
Okay? And then if you can't get that, then there's it kind of devolves into, each side is holding back what remains of its nuclear forces, trying to
Mhm.
pick up the other side, tactically. It then devolves into something else, or one side or the other trying to surrender. But I think this is my analysis. I did this a long time ago. Once you use weapons of mass destruction on people, they don't surrender unless they have no way to resist. When you're talking about a continent-sized country like the United States, you could
Mhm.
keep 100 million people here, and there are other 100 million. They're in no mood to surrender.
Mm.
Way everything that people thought they had for life. You
Mm.
so angry. You give them nothing. There's nothing they have left to lose. You have made an enemy like you have never seen before.
Well, yeah, that's
Psychological,
true.
yeah. Psychological. This is what by the way, the Nazis did to the Russian people. Hitler, if the German generals were arguing with Hitler, let's be nice to the Russians, we can win this war. And Hitler, he hated the Russians and the
Yes.
Slavic people.
Yes.
So Hitler sabotaged himself. They got a lot of Russians and Ukrainians cooperated with the Nazis, but when they got to see that they were not their friend and they were invading, that turned people against them. It mean, they didn't want to fight for Stalin, but they did,
Yeah,
because
well, it turns out with the OUN, they were pro-Axis. It was a Ukrainian fascist organization, the OUN, and they wanted to collaborate with the Nazis to create the new Europe, as they said, as the OUN said, free of Bolsheviks and capitalists. And the Nazis would not have anything of it. Now, yes, they did have collaborationist governments, but they were total puppet governments staffed by ex-Bolsheviks and imported, Russian and Belarusian fascists, and that was pretty much it. But Russia was going to be subjugated. I found some interesting quotes, by the way, to get back to Latin America, I think for the benefit of the audience, and it's in volume 1 of my book, Turning the Page. And I said, have here quoted, during a visit to Cuba in December 2005, Eva Morales noted, I am sure of the fact that Fidel and Chavez are commanders of the forces of freedom in America. In America, of course, North America, South America. I am sure of the fact that Fidel and Chavez are commanders of the forces of freedom in America to liberate America and the world. There was evidence that there was concrete planning by Russia and China for a potential invasion of the U.S. from its leftist Latin American allies, a plan proposed in a May 2015 article by two well-known military thinkers, Alexander Perendijev from the Association of Independent Military Political Experts and Colonel General Leonid Ivashov, a member of the Academy of Geopolitical Problems, advocated the creation of combined Russian-Chinese units in Nicaragua and the stationing of Russian troops in Venezuela and Brazil under its Marxist president Lula da Silva. I mean, this is my rewriting it,
Right.
the stuff in the articles. They also proposed the stationing of a Russian task force off the coast of the U.S. based in Cuba. This would all be accompanied by, quote, major diplomatic and information offensive. Venezuela and Cuba continued their attempts to spread revolution throughout Latin America. In the wake of the riots against neoliberal globalist quote-unquote free market policies in countries like Chile, Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro, who was trained by a member of the Cuban Communist Party Politburo, by the way, Nicolas Maduro commented, the plan is going exactly as we hoped with, quote, the union of social movements, progressives, and revolutionaries of all Latin America and the Caribbean. There you go. Black and white.
Yeah.
And I don't get paid for this, or I get paid very little. You know, Jeff, do you think I should consider a career in the CIA, or you think I should axe that again? Because I tried to apply once in 1997. What do you think?
No, you're white and you're a male. They won't have you. I already went down that route. They said, we're not hiring anybody who's white or male. We're only going for women and minorities. So
yeah, that's a whole different story unto itself. But what are your thoughts about that? What I just read.
Well, yeah. What my understanding, from Hugo Chavez's pilot was telling me the same sort of thing. No, they're Marxist-Leninists. And, this goes back to how Lenin described, America would be the capitalist dinosaur. We'll surround her, we'll cut her off, and then we'll destroy her. She'll be forced to surrender or she'll be wiped out, And so they're following, Marxism, Leninism is like a religion, but it's also a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a military, political, every which way. They use cultural warfare, they use every form of warfare, and it's about world conquest. And America is the main thing that stands in their way. If they get rid of us, they don't, I think they'd like, this is my thinking, I think they'd like to do this without having a real war in the Middle East or Europe, or in the Far East. They want to bring the war right here to North America, and they want the rest of the world to tremble and say, all right, we'll be neutral. And then they watch America get destroyed, and the rest of the world then has to surrender, because the Chinese theory is you strike down the big power, you strike down America, you strike terror, others will all just fold, and that makes the war easier. So the main war is, everybody thinks of World War III as being fought, in Europe, in the Far East, in the Middle East. They don't think about it being fought here. I believe when you look at the way the Chinese talk about Qiao Chen and about the way the articles in the Russian press that appeared about them building this icebreaker fleet so they could move their northern fleet to the Bering Strait across the ice. You want to move that means there's not going to be a war in Europe and the Atlantic. That means Europe is not, they're going to keep Europe neutral. They want the fleet to assist with the invasion of Alaska, it means. That exercise that they did in 2018, in September of 2018, wasn't that the year? It was September of 2018. It was the Operation West, where the Chinese and the Mongolian and the Russian military, it was basically a practice nuclear war and invasion of Alaska is what it was.
Well, the Soviets, according to two defectors, one with the pseudonym Jan Bukhar, who testified for the House Committee on Inter-American Activities, I think, in 1955, And he was trained in Moscow at one of their military academies, perhaps the Frunze Military Academy. And he was talked about how even back then, against he was given some details of the war plan against America under Stalin, and he talked about how Alaska would be re-annexed back into by Russia, this time, of course, by the Soviet Union. And another one, there was an article from the Los Angeles Times which talked about America, the miniseries that came out in 1987, and this fellow who was a defector from the Soviet Red Army, I don't remember his last name. It started with a Z, and his first name, I believe, was Sergei Zamyshchov or something or another, and he was affiliated with UCLA. He remembered also giving a briefing back at some point where he was told that the war plan against America would involve 50,000 Soviet troops invading and occupying Alaska. And so there was even a movie called, I think, World War III with Rock Hudson from the early 80s, which fictionalized account of the Soviets invading Alaska and seizing the Alaska pipeline and the oil fields. So, why would they discontinue that? And Lunev talks about in 1992 how he was privy to the briefings by the general staff of the Russian army where Alaska would be taken back by the Russians. So there's corroboration, and I look for this corroboration.
I would add that 20 years ago, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, the head of the Russian Liberal Democratic Party, sponsored a bill in the Duma that passed. That bill set up the government for Alaska. The new Russian government for Alaska was set up. It's in Russian law, the structures and the legal structures for governing Alaska. It was set up 20 years ago. So yeah, it kind of went, people saw it in the news and like, that's funny, And then, of course, there's been the talk about the Russians building a tunnel, Siberia, under the Bering Strait to connect Siberia to Alaska, to make it so you could just drive straight through.
Yes, exactly. It's strange.
It is.
Now, we've been on for quite a long time, but I want to talk about a very unfortunate, painful part of this whole process. It's the role of American collaborators. And what's very instructive is people will say, well, it could never happen here. People would never collaborate against, with the Russians and the Chinese, assuming that their plan is to put in a puppet government. Now, a little background. General Shana, General Jan Shana, one of the highest level defectors from the communist bloc during what I call the open Cold War, he defected in 1968, and he testified. Dr. Joe Douglas wrote about it in the book by Ending Nuclear War, co-authored by Joseph D. Douglas Jr. and I believe Stephen Cimbala. And it was the most comprehensive discussion of Soviet war and occupation plans in the United States. And I talked about it in my Red Dawn video, and I'll repeat it again for the sake of the audience. What it basically involved was they calculated by about 1967 it would take 210 nuclear weapons to cripple the United States. And afterwards, the way the occupation would work is they expected elements from the Communist Party USA, big business and big finance, academics, and left-wing senators to form a coalition collaborationist government in Washington, D.C. They would immediately abolish the states and create new regions, new regional governments, and they would abolish our states that we all know. They would nationalize TV and radio immediately and use it as propaganda to try and preach that it was all our fault, that, the war started, the war was imposed on, very similar to what the Nazis did in their Eastern European allies that they occupied with their collaborators. They had the same thing, that the war was imposed on us and we're here as liberators and all the rest of it. People that were considered right-wing anti-communists, they would be purged by what was termed apparently by the Soviets internally by salvation courts, where people basically like you and I would be immediately and swiftly executed. The new government would be called the government of national salvation, and then under the government, these are puppet bodies, would be called salvation and restoration committees. I don't know if you've heard about all this or not. It's very fascinating. I print about it in my books. I talk about it in my Red Dawn episode of the Patriotic Populist. Um, and they would bring in Cuban and Soviet bloc technicians to remake the United States in basically the Soviet image. And I'm probably leaving out different things, but what's significant is already there was a presence amongst the extreme left, even in our political class, that the Soviets knew that they could count on. And I don't want to mention names. I mean, there are legal ramifications, but I'd like to caution the viewers to look at Europe during World War II. You look, and East Asia occupied by Japan. The way to predict which Americans would collaborate or have a good chance of collaborating, they work for a Russian or Iranian news service. They're a stringer for them. If they utter constant sympathies and apologies for them, they're involved with extremist groups that tend to praise these governments at every chance, or individuals that have close business ties with these organizations, whether they're right-wing Republican senators, watch them, and watch the lefties. You got a few lefties in Congress that have a bad history with this too, praising these governments and traveling to these governments. You take a look at people who are involved in friendship societies too as well. Are they involved in friendship societies? And they do exist in the United States. And these are the people that look at France. France, you had elements of the dissident left, like Marcel Déat of the neo-socialist movement. He became a minister in the Vichy government and an ardent collaborator with the Nazis, thought they were creating this great form of socialism. Look at Jacques Doriot. You look at Alphonse de Chateaubriand, for example, of the group Collaboration, for example, had high society people, and these high society people loved Germany. They thought it was an alternative to liberal capitalism and communism, and they talked about it before the war. Or Fernand de Bourguignon, who later became the Vichy French ambassador, I think, to the Nazis and whatnot. And these were all people, veterans groups. You had Scipini and others in France that were heads of veterans organizations, were these patriotic people and felt we can't have war with Germany, we got to have peace, and blah 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 blah. It's the Jews and the plutocrats and the socialists that are driving, and capitalists driving us into this war and everything else with Germany. And France can beat Germany, we don't have to worry about the German threat. And others actually said, we could trade with Germany. In fact, they ignored that France had a huge trade deficit up until the last years of the Third Republic's existence, massive trade deficits with Nazi Germany. Yeah. So this is how you can find who will probably be a collaborator. Look for these people in the United States. You see somebody that fits any of those categories, if God forbid this country is invaded, and if their plan has changed from scorched earth depopulation to basically keeping part of our population and recruiting Americans as overseers, honest to God, Jeff, I think there are Americans that are so freaking masochistic that they don't care.
Oh, I know. I get them writing hate mail to me all the time. They even write on my blog. They write the comment in the comments, and you can read it. And you can see the treason, the spirit of treason in this country is not weak. There's a lot of them here.
Why do you think people are that way? You've encountered more Marxists personally than I have.
It's a kind of psychopathy. I mean, there's a self-hatred is a part of it, disliking the self, narcissism, identity disorder, all of these things psychologically. I think I think that really all the things we're talking about in terms of politics and political ideologies and philosophies, we've underestimated the psychological component. that it's psychologically abnormal people are driving this bus. That this is we have a problem in modernity generating psychopathic personalities, and the breakdown of the family is a part of it. The rapidity of change in modern society, the breakdown of traditional beliefs and spirituality, and really having the humility. You got, everybody is an egomaniac now. They're all geniuses, Nevin. Everybody's a genius now. And it's like they all know, without even studying, without ever having to bother. Look, I am not as smart as a lot of the people that I'm talking about. They're smarter than me, but they haven't done their homework. They don't really care. They're like, their moral compass is broken. And I put it that way. You in order to even do the things, I mean, most people would say that you and I are stupid for talking about this, because they'd say, this is what they'd say. This is a very selfish way of thinking. Well, what are you going to get out of this? Nobody's going to pay you. You're going to get shot or hurt by the people if what you're saying is true. And if what you're saying isn't true, you're discredited as a nut, right? So that's why, by the way, Nevin, there's so few of us, that the idea that, I could be wrong, but I think this is, I just try to figure it out. And this is what I see. So, I mean, then I have to, you see a baby crawling towards a well, you've got an obligation. You have to, okay, maybe I'm wrong, but isn't that a baby and isn't that a well and it's crawling toward it? Can't we do something? I can't do anything. Can you do something? Can we do it together? And of course, no, we don't seem to be able to.
Yeah, I'd be freaking out if I saw that, actually.
It is, well, and it's like,
if a baby going in a well, I'd be freaking out as a father myself. So, yeah.
A Russian friend who's very much into literature and writing, and he's written some novels, and people said to him, why don't you just go and write Anna Karenina? Why don't you? And he says, I'm going to write about some woman who throws herself under a train when all of Western civilization is throwing itself under a train.
Yeah, there you go.
Story. That's the real story of our time. And I think he's right. If your heart is with what's happening now. And of course, he told me recently that he says, I can't write. I can't hardly do anything. I'm riveted. I'm watching it all go down on TV in real time. I mean, he's in this sort of a state of shock. So, what can you say?
Yeah, and there's going to have to be a lot of steps. I think our next show should talk about the steps we can take to prevent it. I mean, at least in a theoretical sense, because, I realistically, will it come about like a snap of our finger where things change? No, this is going to take a long time to undo. And unfortunately, we don't have a long time because we don't know when the whole thing collapses. And, this is going to be, I guess, we'll talk about it in whether it's the next show or show thereafter. Maybe we can talk about solutions and stuff like that. It's going to be very complex. I will say one of the top solutions, this is why you and I are doing this, is education. I think the people have to be made aware of this. One of the things, before I'll close, I think communism and other forces of the totalitarian variants of socialism and collectivism are partially symptoms of unresolved problems in Western society. And there I compare the socialists and communists and not neo-Nazis as like bloodhounds. They're always looking for fissures in society to exploit. And that's my issue. I actually listen to communists like Caleb Maupin and others, and yeah, there are things I agree with them on surface criticisms. The problem is that knowing history and having a moral compass, I could never accept their formulas because it involves extreme brutality. I mean, you and I have met people from communism. It's a hellscape. You don't want this for your children and grandchildren. You and I have this information. We have an obligation to share it with the public. And I think the very most important thing to do is education. I think that's probably the topmost thing to address right now. So, did you have any concluding comments of this rather lengthy, voluminous interview, which you contributed an incredible amount of insight, analysis, and facts? That'll be my conclusion.
Yeah, I think this is fine. I gotta go. I've got a busy thing going on here soon. So, but thank you so much. This has been an important talk. I think that you are so informed and you know so much, and I've researched so much. I think this is very productive for people to hear it, that people who've really researched these things, and you can talk about sources and we can talk about books and witnesses and people that everybody's missed. People are going to want to listen to this and write down things if they can, but I think this is incredibly valuable what we're doing. So I thank you
Yeah.
for having the idea of doing it.
Yeah, thank you. And I've learned a tremendous amount from you too, as well. Some of it actually kind of earth-shaking for me. So I want to thank you for that, and thank you for appearing on the show. We're going to do more, and even after our series, I still would like to have you on as a recurring guest. In addition to that, I'd like the listeners to check out your blog, J.R. Nyquist blog. Go on Amazon.com or Bookfinder.com. Mr. Jeff Nyquist's books are available there. Origins of the Fourth World War is a tremendous work. I highly recommend it. It's not your typical right-wing, sort of Tea Party thing, and it's not obviously a communist tract. It's very insightful criticisms of both the neoliberal right as well as the hardcore Stalinist tanky left. Really good stuff there. And again, thank you for appearing. And I got plans too I got company coming in less than 20 minutes, so I have to get ready.
I gotta go. Okay, Nevin, thank you very much. Bye.
Here, okay.